Adam, welcome to the Founders Lounge.
Thank you. Nice to be on.
So, Adam, I've done a little bit of research about you. We haven't really met before, but I've Googled a little bit, and my understanding is you started one business at a pretty young age. I think you were at university, and then you sold that, and then you started another business which acquired the first one. So that's something you'll have to explain a little bit because I didn't quite understand. It's like an interesting, unusual turn of events, I suppose, in a way. And then you took that to an 8-figure exit, and then now you're building your third startup, which is probably the most ambitious one or the most kind of disruptive one out of the three. Is that roughly correct? Is that a fair introduction of you?
Yeah, you've definitely done your research. Yeah, there's some interpretation there as well. It's good.
Well, I'm curious to dive a little bit deeper into that. But I'm wondering, so when I was doing a little bit of research, or when I was, looking into these things, my first impression was that you're the kind of person who had lemonade stands when you were 13, 15. Is that correct? Were you always kind of an entrepreneurial person?
I don't think so. I mean,
Okay.
my parents are not business people. Like my dad's an architect. My mum was pretty much a stay-at-home mum. Did some odd jobs and that sort of thing. But yeah, pretty much stay at home. And I mean, my granddad was an entrepreneur, I guess. So maybe it's in the blood somewhere, but it wasn't. It wasn't super direct. I was never in sort of an environment in which things like that were happening. My main passion was always building.
Uh-huh.
So I was always kind of passionately I guess building anything I could. So obviously Lego, there's McCann, all that stuff. Anything I could get my hands on, I wanted to build stuff. Even, like if my mum threw away a cardboard box, it was sacrilege, right? Every cardboard box could be used to build something, as a sort of super young kid. And then basically I very quickly discovered software. And what was so amazing about software was the speed of the feedback loop, really. So you could essentially, input something and get such a quick output, right? So, the kind of building of websites and software became a true addiction for me, to be honest. And, my dad was a little bit of a laggard in terms of technology. So, that we'd often have to battle for any type of technology. We didn't get a VHS until pretty much VHS was going out of fashion, and and we didn't get the internet or a computer for God knows how long. So I would be at school, I'd stay at school till like 9:30 p.m. Building websites of Robot Wars, and Robot Wars was a UK show. It was really again about building robots, and also video games. I think I made a porn website at one point because that seemed to be very popular. It wasn't something I was just like I wanted people to visit the website, right? So I kind of followed the the demand. Hopefully my parents are not going to listen to this.
That's smart though. You actually follow the demand. That's unlike most developers in their early days. Because I was the same. I had a very similar kind of beginnings, right? I just wanted to build stuff. I discovered web development. I was like, oh my god, this is like magic. This is the best thing ever. I can write some code and then like it just appears on the screen. It was so cool. I don't think I realized that early on that you should go into things that have a demand, such as porn.
I mean, yeah, it's I don't know. Yeah, why would that be? I don't know. I think that the thrill came from people using it, right? I remember winning some competition in my CAD class, my craft and design class, which was about it was you had to build a structure. You were given a load of very thin wooden sticks, and you had to build a structure that would support as much weight as possible.
Okay.
And it's a simple lattice structure, right? But it was able to support the largest or fattest kid in the class, which I always was like, yes. That was always like, it's just even if it was simple as that, right? So someone utilizing something you've built in the simplest terms was like an addiction, like a thrill. So naturally, websites, that are just open for anyone to visit, and the potential is just unlimited. It was like the heroin of the drug world, right?
Nice. Okay, so a builder first, and then can you talk a little bit about your first business?
Yeah. So, I mean, the building thing was coupled with video games at the beginning, right? So I was really into PlayStation. We didn't have a PC for ages, and I managed to scrape enough money together to get a PlayStation, and was absolutely obsessed with that. Absolutely loved it. And I think when I was, Final Fantasy VII back in the day, I was playing that, and when the credits were rolling up, I burst into tears as a kid, because I was like, oh my god, all the names are Asian names. It's like, this is clearly not something that's easy to get. I was just some really stupid sort of perception that the video games industry was all in Japan and Asia, right? And I was just so obsessed with wanting to somehow crack that industry and get into it somehow and build something, with these amazing people, because that was such an epic game over like 7 discs. It was a story, it was a journey, and all my friends were on it at school, and so we were all sort of into it, and I was like, I want to be part of making something this epic, and so anyways, that was kind of a core mission of mine. And it turned out that there was a friend, this was a bit later on at uni, a friend was building this kind of multiplayer PC website, and it sucked, right? He really didn't know how to build websites. It was crap, and at that point I was pretty good at it. And so I said, you know what, I'll help you out. I'll give you a hand. And so I did, and I spent, I ended up pouring hours and hours into it, and it became my baby, right? And it basically, the guy lost interest, and I ended up becoming the de facto kind of driver of this thing. And turned it into a multi-platform video games website, so covering not just PC but lots of different consoles. Hence the PlayStation thing coming back in, and I never intended for that to be a business. That was always just me helping a friend, and then eventually, really just building something, right? And one thing led to another, and we ended up getting a few people looking at it, a few people checking out the website, and then we thought, well, we need games to review, we need sort of content to write, and so we get in touch with publishers of the industry, and so a few, like most of them would not sort of read emails from like a startup website that has basically no traffic. So we just spent ages just like pummeling these publishers for free games basically that we could review, because we didn't have the money to buy these games, right? And one thing led to another, and we just built that up organically. We just absolutely grinded the hell out of it. And I remember this was when it was actually a bit more difficult to start a business. It wasn't so fashionable to be an entrepreneur. My dad was always telling me to go on the dole. It was like, what are you doing up there on the computer? Like, to get a real job or whatever. And so I disparage my dad here a lot, but he's very, very supportive. Well, in general, but it's just these weren't things that he understood, right? So
I clearly remember my mom at some point telling me, she was like, can you just stop for one day talking about websites? Because I was also so obsessed about websites and building websites, and like that was so cool that I would talk about it all the time. She didn't know that my whole career is going to be in websites.
And how lucrative that could be, right? They changed their tune when they realize it's a big business. And, I remember I was building a web server once, and I wasn't building a web server. I think I was using Apache or something. Anyway, my mum walked in, and it was like 3 a.m. It was like, what the hell are you doing up? And then she looked at my screen, and it was is it 403 forbidden? Was in big letters on the screen, and she thought I was looking at like porn or something. But it's just no, mum, it's just HTTP status code. It's fine. It just means we don't have permission to access the page. She obviously didn't understand. She's like, what are you looking at? Hilarious. But, so where was I? Just about the first business. So anyway, we managed to build that up and get some traction, and we ended up getting a reasonable amount of viewers. And I was thinking kind of more like, maybe this could be an interesting small business, and it ended up registering the company, which was a bit more difficult back then. That was kind of like, that was the start of that. And it wasn't probably until 2 years in that I kind of really started to understand the value of advertising as well. And we got to the point where we could start, we had some demand, right? Some people were actually asking to advertise on our website. I was thinking, what, people want to give us money for this? It's like amazing. And then I started, I realized then it's like, okay, this could be something. and then just started going hard on that angle. And one day, accidentally, one of these media owners, the agencies that end up booking advertising, they accidentally leaked a spreadsheet of their entire campaign. And this listed all of the sites on the campaign and how much they're paying for the advertising. I was like, oh my God, we are undercharging by like 20x. And just realized like the enormity of kind of the opportunity. And that really just fueled the fire, right? And obviously we bumped our pricing up massively. And it was super interesting. And then eventually that allowed me to start looking for a bit of money. And we were never that, I had no, this is like complete noob. I had no clue what I was doing at this point. I should clarify with all of this. No, I didn't really know even about fundraising. I just knew that I needed some capital to really get this going in a big way. And so I wrote a business plan and did all of the stuff you might expect as a noob. Banks would not have any of it. They weren't, it's a complete joke basically going to a bank. I soon realized. But then I eventually found there was a guy on Skype I was talking to, and I had no idea this guy was like super wealthy at all, right? But I was talking to him. He's a photographer, and I kept in contact with him because I thought one day we'll have some content where we want some amazing photographs taken of one of the events we go to. And I was just chatting with him, how's it going, blah blah blah. And I was talking, he was like, asking me the same questions. I was like, well, I built this business plan, and we're looking for a bit of money to get things going. He was like, oh, okay. Can you send that to me? I'm kind of interested. And I was like, yeah, well, sure, why not? Like, get some feedback. Is why not? And then he just started asking loads of questions. You can imagine where things are going, right? And then he's like, yeah, that sounds good. Let's do it. And I kind of at that point, I'm still in my parents' bedroom, like up, like not my parents, but my bedroom in my parents' house upstairs, sort of like just out of uni, kind of. Pretty much in my boxes in front of a computer. It's like, and then this guy saying, yeah, you're going to send you 25k kind of thing. I was like, okay, well, I'll believe it when I see it, but absolutely, let's go for it, right? So I ended up signing the documents, and I remember that the bank teller, when I went to the bank, sort of looked at me like, it's this kid, oh yeah, I'm expecting a bunch of money, can I open an account and stuff. She was like, yeah, whatever. Like she didn't even really believe me, and my parents didn't either, right? They thought this was some kind of scam or something. And the money arrived, and this guy, I mean, from the perspective of this guy, what a madman! Like, he's just sending some kid in a different country. He's based in Norway. Some kid in a different country, just wiring 25k just like that. Off this business plan that I must have been completely full of naivety and everything else. And sure enough, it arrived, and that was the beginning of like a pretty much a 8-year journey building stuff up. We got to the site up to like 3.5 million users, and tens of millions of page views. We made a big business. We made a small business out of it. We got we're generating sort of 150k profits annually by a few years in, and it was I made a ton of mistakes, by the way. Like, again, the whole thing was leading by intuition, which is probably the worst way to lead, right? Hiring my friends and kind of doing really what I think.
Mistake,
because you think, why not? And obviously as so it's a bit of a baptism of fire in that sense. But obviously you learn, as long as you learn from mistakes and you build, then you can get some success. And indeed, we did end up winning some, quite a few industry awards, and got some recognition in the industry. We became, one of the biggest independent video game sites in the world, basically. And then just what ended up happening is the advertising market started to get really consolidated. So we had to grow very, very quickly inorganically. And so we were then looking at partners and that sort of thing, talked to a potential partner, and they ended up being really interested in basically acquiring us. And then there was that whole conversation. And so why I would say you had a sort of some decent interpretation in your research. I don't know how you established this, but yeah, I ended up becoming a founder of a new media company that they produced, or they created, and bought my own company as part of that company. So strange way.
So they met you, or like you met with them, and they said, okay, we're going to establish a new entity, and we want you to be a co-founder of that entity, and we're going to buy your old company.
Yeah. So I had like that was part of the compensation, I guess, was I had stock in a little bit of stock in the new company, and they would give me like some cash from the asset purchase of the previous company. So yeah, it was an interesting, unusual deal. But yeah, they had a bunch of other sites as part of the network, and the combined entity was much more competitive in the market, and so we were able to keep things going. And we had over 100 million page views. We had like 15 million unique users a month. So we ended up being we overnight just became much bigger, and so which was very important at that point because all of the consolidated advertising and everything. So yeah, it was an interesting ride for sure. And then that I ran that for I built up the kind of the content and the sales and the product side of that for over a couple of years, and then we ended up selling that to like a Canadian PLC for a bunch of money in 2018, 2018. I can't remember now. My LinkedIn says it.
2019 or
2019. Okay.
You stopped working there in 2019, so I don't know when the exit was.
Yeah, I think it was before that. It was it's a little bit before that. 2018, I think it was. Which obviously, I was like, what the hell am I going to do now? I've just been doing this for best part of a decade.
Yeah.
It was a bit of a funny one then. It was like a bit of a voyage of self-discovery for a year. Yeah.
Just one quick question around that. So both of those companies, you owned several different websites, right? Or several different, media brands that were living under the umbrella of those companies, right?
Yeah.
Was that each one was focused on a different target audience, different kind of persona, if you want?
Exactly. Yeah. So we had the flagship site videogamer.com, which was a multi-platform video game site, but we did have others that focused on specific games. There's a big game at the time called Destiny. We had the biggest Sims websites. That was primarily a female audience, very, very different.
Yeah.
Very much more attractive to a complete different set of advertisers, for instance. So yeah, it was quite varied, very varied.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. And it's pretty interesting. A good friend of mine with whom we started this podcast together 2 years or so ago, he owns a number of different tourism brands, and you could say, in theory, you could have just one touristic agency that offers different services, but instead the approach that he went with, they launched, I don't know what's the number, but probably 20, maybe 30 different brands. Each one is just specialized in one very specific thing, and it works so much better because they're hyper specialized in each one of those subjects, and they market differently with each one. And just I think it's a lot of it is also just the customer perception, right? They seem like they're the expert in that one particular thing, and they are, and works really well for him.
No, yeah, it's somewhat analogous for sure. I mean, you just got to be careful if you're the problem I always had with the media space and advertising driven media space was that your customer was different to your reader. So you've got a bunch of users on the website. And it's almost like the two are loggerheads, right? It's the two are opposing forces, right? So you make the service fantastic for users. It means it's not fantastic for advertisers because they get less exposure because none of the readers actually want advertising, right? And the advertisers want to just to show their various wares to the readers. So this was always a problem because a revenue stream had to basically appease or our website had to appease advertisers for our revenue stream. So it was a very difficult situation, and I didn't like it, right? Because when you want to build something, you want to kind of you want them to derive value to the degree that they're paying for it, right? So we did eventually launch a subscription system, and this was kind of when Patreon was starting to emerge, and there were a bit more. It was a bit more, a bit more kind of, I guess, fashionable, if you like, or a bit more accepted that people would actually pay for content, because it wasn't so much the case before that point. And we tried to start that. It never became a significant part of our revenue. And I think even now it's a struggle for a lot of people. But yeah, that was the angle towards it. But that was always this kind of thing. I had a bunch of checkboxes when thinking about my next business, and one of those was that the customer and the person deriving value from your product should be the same.
Interesting. Can you tell me more about the checkboxes? I'm a very analytical person. I have checklists and spreadsheets for everything, including business ideas. So what else are the checkboxes for a good business idea, or at least maybe a business idea that's a good fit for you? I don't know how exactly you analyze
that's exactly what it was. It was more bespoke to me, right? So I spent a lot of time thinking about a new business, and honestly, you're really actually statistically more likely to be successful if you join a kind of rocket ship at the inflection point between having validated a problem and scale, because in between that point, there's enough room for you on the cap table, right? If you want to become a co-founder or something to actually benefit from its success, but you're also low enough risk that you go in and you're not wasting your time, right? And it's not going to go, well, it might go kaput, but there's less of a chance of it. So knowing this, I did spend a lot of time, talking to founders and trying to find my rocket ship. But the reality of the situation is that most founders who are at that point have a good network, and they they're not it's not like they have an inbound advert for co-founder, right? In most cases, any good business doesn't anyway. So or CTO or whatever. And so that was always a problem. So I did establish these checkboxes as a kind of mechanism to determine, okay, if I start my own business, what is it? What problem do I want to sort of solve? What business would look good to me? And so one of them was, it had to be B2B for me. So B2B is what I know. It's what I had been doing, because as I say, whilst you could consider a video game media company, if you like, a B2C, really the value was going to we were deriving revenue from advertisers. So it was really B2B in terms of its business model. And so I knew that, and that translates to basically having sort of much lower volume than a B2C, but a sort of mid to large transaction value, right? And for me, that was much easier for my brain to deal with, right? Dealing with like tiny transactions and millions of them is a whole different ball game. So that was one kind of significant thing. The other thing was that media is hyper competitive. Like every man and his dog has a website, right? So and a video game website for that matter, and a blog and everything else, right? So already, you out the gates, you have enormous competition, and so you just have to be so much better than the rest, and your USP has to be that much more compelling. And so one of the other checkboxes was, I didn't want to go into a market that was already incredibly competitive. I wanted to, or at least have a product that was differentiated enough that it was a 10x over the next best one, right? And that was clear. That the one of the other checkboxes was that I wanted to be able to build an MVP solo. So I didn't want to have a high cost of capital to start the business. So I didn't want to buy plant or machinery. I didn't have to hire a bunch of people. And as a software developer, it's almost like your own secret weapon when it comes to building a tech business, because it's intangible. You get a coding editor, and you can almost, that's the magic of it, right? You can just, that's kind of what also, excites me about software and building. But so building an MVP solo was one of the other tech boxes.
Okay, so three checkboxes. Did I get it right?
3 or 4, yeah. So
maybe
yeah, B2B competition, can build an MVP.
Was the fourth one the one that we mentioned before? It has to be there has to be value for the customer, so they're gonna. Yeah,
the same. The customer deriving value, and the customer that's using your product should be the one that's paying you for the value, right? So it's just, most businesses are like that. It's just I happen to come from one that wasn't, right? So that was just one of the things I wanted.
Okay, and that brought you to Claimer then.
Well, not directly for sure, because Claimer came about in a funny way. So I mean, before that point, as I say, there was this like voyage of self-discovery, and I was looking, like, after this whole like chasing my tail, if you like, by trying to find this rocket ship for about 3 to 6 months, and basically getting nowhere, and also having this kind of imposter syndrome of thinking that I can't build a business myself. That was the other thing. Was that I somehow need a co-founder, but I didn't have a brother or someone I trusted enough to do that. And so before I realized that, I was actually trying to find this inflection point, this rocket ship company, to try and co-found with someone else, because Y Combinator famously says you're statistically less likely to be successful if you are a solopreneur, if you like, and that was kind of drilled into me, and I it turns out to be complete rubbish in my eyes. And I mean, there is benefit in having a co-founder. There's also drawbacks, but there's nothing stopping you. Like if that's you you deal the cards, or you play with the cards you're dealt with, it, right? And so those were mine, and I didn't have an easy route to having a co-founder. So yeah, I don't think that was a problem. But I interviewed MPs, and this is all, in the sort of vein of the checkboxes, and was really trying to find a big problem to solve. I remember posting on Quora about trying to find, what are the advances in waste management kind of thing. Really trying to find an unsexy problem. I mean, I don't know if you've read 0 to 1, but Peter Thiel talks about secrets, right? So important truths of the world that other people don't yet realize. And so there's not, obviously really hard to find these days, and not all of them are commercially viable, but there are a lot of them out there. In terms of overall problems, there's obviously a multitude of them. And what better source of problems than local government, right? So going to an MP and saying, what are the biggest things you're dealing with right now? And so I went down a whole route of trying to solve things in the public sector. Things like education and housing and that sort of thing. And that turned out to be full of problems and huge things that can be solved. But there's a little bit of corruption. I say a little bit. There's a lot, and there's it's not the best way to build a big business, right? Is to go into the public sector. I mean, I had one conversation with Dominic Campbell over at FutureGov, who'd been grinding away at this for, God, I don't know, 10, 12 years or something. And it was very slow progress. And it was, hats off to that guy, because, it's a great business he's built, but it's been a hard slog for him. And I could just see it was like it's hard enough building a business when you've got a product in a free market that's kind of a bit more predictable and obvious revenue streams. But relying on public sector, it's just a nightmare. So anyway, in the previous business, I had done an R&D claim before. I discovered the R&D system and realized that I could make a claim. I assume it was like men and women in white coats and pipettes and curing cancer and baldness and stuff. But it turns out you can claim R&D, as a software company, or as anyone really that's doing any kind of innovative thing in a field of science or technology. And we were in my business, we were building this very ambitious content system. I won't go into that, but it was it's supposed to be groundbreaking. Everything else completely failed, but for R&D that didn't actually matter. As long as you'd invested and you'd tried, it worked. And so I went through this process, and I found the whole thing horrendously complex. It was expensive. It was slow.
So how does it work? How does it actually work? The old school way. How do you claim that?
It's just consultants. It's just a bunch of guys in a room who have some idea about R&D, and they're sending you spreadsheets and Word documents over email. And there's hundreds of emails. There's calls that you have to go on. Sometimes they physically visit you. Less so in the pandemic, but that's something that happens in the larger businesses. And it's generally like a process stuck in the 90s. It's so archaic. And I just thought somebody should really fix this. And this was, in the middle of building my other business. So it wasn't something I immediately thought I would ever look at. But then fast forward 2 years, sold that business, and then eventually remembered this. And I was absolutely stunned that the government hadn't done something about it and fixed it. And two, there was no private company. It's like, how many industries can you look at that have not been disrupted by technology yet? How many in some way, right? And this is one of those. And I just thought, God, that's a valuable secret there.
Yes. Yeah. Interesting. I was talking to somebody recently who works in the automotive industry, and he said that, but for some huge company in the automotive, and he said that there are so many things that are secrets, as in if you don't work in that industry, you just have no idea that even exists, that's a problem. And they're done in an incredibly old-fashioned way, and just really ripe for disruption, just ready for somebody to come in and do it faster and better and in an easier and cheaper way.
Yeah, I think that the best businesses, the founders of the best businesses, sit sort of in between that Venn diagram, right, where you between two different domains. So most people only have one sort of set of expertise, right, in one domain. But if you happen to have a second, you understand the patterns, the interactions between those two. And that's a very unique perspective. And there's very few people that have that, and even fewer that have that perspective and kind of have the kind of, the lack of dependencies and the willingness to actually make it into something, right? Yeah. And I think this explains why, someone like Elon Musk is so successful, right? Because there's just the experience in so many different domains.
Yeah, that really changed my opinion or my perspective on how you can be really good at something. I don't know when or where I read that, but it's really, really hard to be the best in the world in one particular thing. It's really, really hard because, 7 billion people, and it's kind of hard, right? But if you're pretty good at one thing and pretty good at another thing, and then you took the crossover of those two things, that's where the magic happens. That's where you can then be the best in the world in that overlap, right? So I think that's a good way to look at where your competitive advantage can be as an individual, I suppose.
I think, understanding the domain to the degree that you truly can appreciate the problem, I guess. What are the problems that exist? And if you really understand the problem, you don't even necessarily, I guess, have to be a master at solving that problem. You just need to know. If you understand it, you can hire the people, you can establish the solution iteratively. But as long as you understand the problem, so much better than everyone else, I think that's like the first port of call. And I think a lot of people are so, it's almost fashionable to be an entrepreneur now. Whereas, like I said beforehand, when I was like building a business, it was, you're a bum. You were not making any money, therefore you were a bum. Entrepreneur wasn't really a thing. But now people are kind of like seeing the survivorship bias in the media, and everyone's sort of thinking, what's the quickest route to my red Ferrari or whatever. It's like, it's not, people aren't thinking about like, C and D, not A and B in terms of the building their business and need to understand the problem. And so there's a lot of people I think are just, far too quickly going into building the company and not building the actual business, if that makes sense. They're like, and this has only been exacerbated through the sort of the bull run of the last 13 years where money has been so accessible. You've kind of got pitch decks that are, supposedly solving, or having some sort of huge implication on the world. And, if you're a good storyteller, you could raise some money. And then you've got this money and you've built the solution that nobody really cares about. I mean, not pointing fingers, but blockchain was obviously there were a lot of startups out there that were solving a problem that didn't exist yet. It's definitely something that's, I think, changing now with the bear market.
I think so. I think there's going to be a lot of reality checks happening already. Even more to follow probably. Okay. So Claimer. so Claimer is your big thing right now. And can you explain what you do? I think I understand, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so our vision is really all about making government incentives, like innovation incentives, like grants, tax credits, and other kind of localized reliefs, much easier to access for SMEs all over the world. And through this, we can, really effectively increase the rate of innovation because, that's what these tax credits are ultimately for, and these various incentives. But right now, Claimer is effectively the easiest way to claim your research and development tax credits in the UK if you're a startup or a scale-up. So we're targeting startups and scale-ups initially. I mean, there's a huge number of them, and they could most benefit from our solution.
Okay. And you do that, so you just make the whole process simplified, digitalized. Basically, you took I suppose you analyzed or you looked at how things worked before, and you just you looked at what can be simplified, what's painful, what's difficult, what's slow, how do we use technology to just make it easy, straightforward.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, we're not like getting to the stage where we're automating it. It's a very complicated sort of thing. Like to put together a tax return requires, or not a tax return, but an R&D claim, which is part of your tax return, actually requires a lot of complicated not just calculations but interpretation, and it's something that is very difficult for technology to achieve. So something, for example, like the technical narrative, if you like. So every R&D report has to contain a written, free text technical report about why, what your activity qualifies for research and development tax credits. And so that's really difficult, right? We're not yet there with kind of AI to be able to kind of automate that sort of thing. However, we can do things to create a symbiosis between humans and machine, if you like, machines, in order to make that process much easier, to the degree that you can achieve the kind of gross margins necessary to build a venture-backed scalable business, right? And so that's where we sit. And so we do have a claims team, and so we do actually still produce part of the reports completely manually. But we're basically chipping away at all of those kind of inefficiencies and making it much more much smoother, both for us on our kind of operational side, but also the client who's actually just wants an easy experience. So that's one of our values, is user experience. So always trying to make it as easy as possible, even if that means we're doing putting levers behind the scenes in the background for a while, right? And so there's an awful lot there. But it's not self-service, so it's not a lot of our people who are considered competitors because they're going for the same customers as us. They're not consultants, or they're consultants that have built they've got some contractors to build like a solution. It's essentially a web form, and all you're really doing then, instead of email, you're getting the companies to just fill in their own information on a web form. Right? That's basically what it is, and that's not really moving the needle anywhere. And so what we're doing is a bit more deep tech than that, I suppose, in the sense that we are integrating and trying to automate elements on our side and the operational side, which allow for us to actually produce the report on behalf of the kind of clients. They're not writing their own report at all. They're actually just giving us the minimum amount of information that we need in order to produce that. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. So I have two questions. I think it happens. It's quite common in tech companies that in the early, you want to optimize something or automate something with technology as much as possible, but it's very common that in the beginning, all of that or a lot of that is just done operationally, right? You got people who do it, and through that manual work, you kind of learn also what can be automated, what are the edge cases, etc., right? So I'm wondering two things. One, you mentioned before you wanted to build a MVP yourself. What was actually the MVP for you for this business? And then the second question is, I suppose, how much has your opinion changed on what your product is actually going to be? Because I suppose you've probably learned a lot now throughout these years on what can actually be automated, what cannot be automated. I think usually, in the beginning, you have a sort of high level of understanding of how it works. And I don't know, sometimes you feel like now you know everything. Sometimes you feel like, okay, I don't know anything, but I'm just going to give it a try and see where we get. So yeah, if you can tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, initially, actually, Claimer started as a much bigger, wider scoped business, right? Or that was the intention, anyway, is that we were going to solve business admin entirely, right? So,
wow, yeah,
okay. Not just R&D. R&D was like the starting point. We were going to sort out your company formation, your legals, your taxes, everything, because that was my pain as an entrepreneur starting a business was all of this crap that isn't building my product or talking to customers was just extraneous kind of stuff that just you have to do as because your company is an entity. It's like almost like a living being, has all of these dependent requirements, and so and all of that takes paperwork and brain cycles that are just wasted, basically.
Yeah.
And so that was really the kind of initial port of call, and R&D was really like that beginning, because that was a way for us to easily sort of, I guess, find a small problem, very small. Well, it looked like a small problem to start with, and then generate some revenue and actually show some traction in order to establish kind of a decent sort of path of growth that we could then show to investor and raise some money and build it up that way, and then expand in scope. That was the original plan. Until I realized that, as you say, as you learn more, you start to understand more about the problem and the market, right? And so what I didn't realize is that government incentives is basically in every developed country in the world, right? And it's all driven by consultants. It's all just old school. There's no decent solution globally here. And so this is a massive market. And I had no idea about this at the starting point. And so there's me thinking I need to solve all the business admin to generate value. Absolutely not. Let's just stick with government incentives. Is by far, it's probably too big even. Like we're starting with R&D. We'll see how far we get. I mean, we can build a very large business just from, say, grants and R&D, or even just R&D internationally. So we're seeing where we go there. But starting out with just that that MVP, if you like, was really just me walking into an accelerator and validating the problem, and just trying to really understand, not even talking about any possible solution, just understanding the problem really, really well, the direct problem with the customer around this.
So walking into the accelerator, you went to talk to the companies in the accelerator.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Found the CEOs and just said, Can I borrow 20 minutes of your time? I just want to talk to you about your business admin and your R&D overheads that you do every year. And so really understood there that there was something there that was worth trying. And so the next thing I did was basically just build a Google form. And just got them to fill in this Google form of the different sort of. I tried to work out what was the minimum amount of information I would need to do R&D claim, and this is at the same time as me having to sort of research and understand how I could actually submit one myself. So I did enlist I gave an accountant a couple of percent. He's done very well from that now, selling in a secondary. But literally, I think he spent about 10 hours of his time helping me, and that he did very well out of that. But he walked me through the process and showed me the kind of software I would need to submit a claim and that sort of thing. And he'd check it out for me, so I wasn't just completely submitting rubbish to the tax authorities, which probably wouldn't be a good look for a first customer. But yeah, and super like hustle, super like scrappy start, and just had a few people go through that Google form and realized actually this seems to work. I can productize this, make it even easier, actually connected to the accounting software and that sort of thing, which I was doing entirely manually. They were giving me access to their accounting software, and I was as if I was the algorithm going through it, checking all of the transactions, right? And super slow and crap and boring job, but enabled me to validate it and move on to the next step, right?
Okay. And where are you at now with Claimer?
Good question. So we've it's been about a couple of years that we've been properly solving this now, and we raised some money last year. We built the team up to about, I think it's 23 or 24 people now. And I'd say we've nailed like a few different aspects of the business. I mean, it's an iterative process, but I think of the different areas of the business as kind of like, machines, right? So you have to, you kind of like, you're scrappily kind of like figuring things out manually and in an analog side of sense. And then you sort of, you figure out, the repeatable processes, and then you build them up. And I'd say that we've pretty much figured that out for product and engineering. We figured that out for like operations and the claim side. And we haven't yet done really much in sales and marketing. In fact, we to a fault, we haven't. It's good. It's a great message to investors and customers, because we've grown to 7-digit revenue without any kind of spend on marketing whatsoever, like purely organic, just customers.
So just word of mouth or what?
Yeah.
Wow.
Pretty much word of mouth, and referrals and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But now it's like, because we haven't been doing that marketing, we're almost like playing catch up, because a bit like the truths with the Peter Thiel's business problems. With marketing, you kind of, and finding the kind of growth channels that really drive that growth. You have to test, you have to iterate, and you have to do a lot of that, and it takes time. All of this takes time, and we haven't really been doing that to a fault. So this is kind of catching up a bit now. Fortunately, we've managed to uncover a few interesting experiments which seem to grow, because organics is great. Organics a wonderful thing to have, but it's unpredictable, it's lumpy, and you can't really, you have no control over it. You can't really, you can't just put a bit more money in and scale it that way. You just have to kind of. So we need that, we need that channel, especially if we're looking to grow to a much bigger business much more quickly.
Okay, very cool. What did I want to say? Changing the topic a little bit. So you had 3 businesses now. I saw an interesting post from you on LinkedIn. So you're quite active on LinkedIn, I see. So I recommend everyone to go follow you. I think you have a lot of interesting content. Cool, interesting, readable for founders, useful content. And I saw one of your recent posts was about kind of quality of a successful founder. In a sense, right? Do you know which post I'm referring to? So you wrote about, so there are three TV shows that were released recently. About one is about Uber, one is about Theranos, and the third one is about WeWork, right? And those are three very controversial companies with extremely controversial founders. All of them had a very interesting story. I've watched one and a half of those so far. So I watched the Uber one. I'm currently watching the WeWork TV show.
You've done the opposite direction.
Yeah, I saw your post. Yeah, you're. I didn't. I've just seen your post today, so unfortunately didn't follow.
A bit like saving your best chocolate in the box to the last one. You're doing the same, so you're going to have a good end.
Aha. Okay. Cool. So that's fine then. That's also good. But yeah, what you wrote about there is, does a successful founder need to be an asshole? Because all those three, all those three founders were massive assholes and very difficult to work with. So what do you think? Does a founder have to be an asshole? Or a sub question to that would be, what do you think are qualities of a successful founder?
Oh man, I mean, I genuinely asked that in my LinkedIn post because I don't know the answer, right? And I desperately hope that you don't have to be an arsehole. You don't have to, step on heads and crush skulls to get there. I think one thing I would caveat with the post, I mean, it was a little bit inflammatory, but like one thing that's commonality between all of these is that one, you've heard about them, and two, most of them, with the exception of Elizabeth Holmes and a few others, are billionaires, right? And they've built billion-dollar valued companies, which only a small fraction of the businesses that are built globally are unicorns, right? Or decacorns or whatever it is. And as a result of that, there's this kind of, again, this sort of survivorship bias where you hear about these more than you would hear about the other ones. And so I suspect there are a great number of very valuable companies that exist in the world that are led by non-arsehole founders, but we just don't know about them. One, because they're not arseholes, and two, because they're not unicorns, right? Because those two things are things that generate interest, and media cares about them. TechCrunch writes about them. They're not going to write about the boring founder who's started a tax-based company that has a good culture and people are generally pretty happy. It's not really much juice there, right? So that's what I hope, right? I mean, I've read a few biographies of founders now, again, though, because they've been successful, but and have drawn some attention to themselves. But there is definitely a commonality that they all seem to be complete dicks. But yeah, I desperately hope that's not the case.
I agree with you. I know a lot of founders who are very kind, extremely kind people, not assholes at all. They're not billionaires, but they also don't want to be billionaires. That's not their goal. So yeah, maybe if you want to be a billionaire, then I mean, you really need to be built differently, and you really need to be an extreme kind of person with extreme personality to create that, right? But I think you can build a very decent business without being an asshole as well.
You just won't have a film or book made about you, but that's probably in my book, in my kind of worldview, that's actually a very, very good thing.
I think so. I would say so as well. But yeah, I guess depends on your life aspirations. If you want a book written about you, well then maybe you need to be more of a controversial personality.
I think what's probably worse is when you've got someone who's someone who has such an ego that they desperately want a book written about them, and they want to sort of mimic this success, and so they actually deliberately almost change their personality to, or the facade of their personality to become an arsehole because they think that's the prerequisite for success. When in fact, it's probably they're successful in spite of, not because of being a dick, right? And they also have, like Jobs famously was a complete penis to a lot of people. But he was incredibly, he had that sort of, he didn't, most people have to speak to customers to understand about the needs of a product, the attributes of a product that's going to sell and just work fantastically. He just knew it, right? He just, it was so instinctive to him that he knew that. And yet you just can't, replicate that. And people are just like, oh, well, obviously if Steve Jobs is firing people on the spot like that and shouting at them, that's, you know, that obviously is some kind of way that you know, I should you know, mimic. And maybe he, you know, down to the, I don't know, fruitarian, like fruit diet and all the rest of it. That's just, you know, incidental almost, or probably not incidental in his case, but something, you know, is not the recipe for success, right?
Yeah, it would seem that somebody like Elizabeth Holmes, she might have followed that kind of route.
Yes.
Because she seemed to just mimic certain traits of certain founders, including clothing, including deep voice, including some pretty creepy, unusual things, right?
Yeah, I mean that I guess that's a bit of an exception, that she did actually become, you know, pretty successful in one sense. Definitely infamous, but I guess and then, I mean, there's a whole other argument about, you know, the whole sort of, I mean, she definitely was committing fraud, but there was an element to a certain point in that journey that it was fake it till you make it, right? Which almost everyone in Silicon Valley adopts. And it's like, well, at what point, you know, I think that determining which point it became fraudulent is the thing that everyone's kind of was a bit like wondering about, you know, because I don't think it is. I think it's a bit of a gray area, frankly.
Yeah, it is a bit of a gray area. And then it also often just comes down to your ethics and your judgment. When is it too much, right? When are you going too far? I want to be conscious of time, Adam. I know that we're over time already. Do you need to run immediately, or do you have 3 minutes for another question?
Yeah, we've got three or 5 minutes.
Okay, cool. Then the final question, which is something we often end the podcast with, which is ideas for potential business ideas or problems that you see in the world and that you think need to be solved. And you know, you've clearly done a fair bit of thinking about problems that need solving. So I'm sure you still see a lot of them. So what are some business ideas or some problems that you think need solving in the world, so that somebody can pick them up and hopefully solve them for you?
I mean, it's something that I think always has to be sort of said with a prerequisite or a caveat that, as we said, you know, not every problem is suited to every entrepreneur, right? It's something that, you know, it's probably best that you understand very, very well through having done it maybe in a job or a hobby, you know, as you kind of spent years sort of investigating it or something like that, and then coupling that with another domain, right? And having that kind of, as I say, sitting between that Venn diagram. But I think in general, I think the best businesses relate to kind of axiomatic problems. So you could think of, like, you know, death or taxes or energy or climate change or waste or something like that, right? Something which, you know, it has very little chance of going away anytime soon, right? And so those are, you know, such core problems that, you know, if you could get any way to solving any part of them, it would be almost automatically valuable, right? So and then it also, you know, depends on the ambitions of the founder, right? I mean, these problems are obviously very, very difficult is the other thing. And so you know, being someone that wants to solve a problem, you've kind of got to identify what your ambition is and what your motives are, right? So as I say, if you set out to build $1 billion business, you'll most likely fail, as I say, because very, very few people get to that stage, and they didn't start. And those that did get to like a $1 billion valuation, most, you know, they didn't start by targeting a $1 billion valuation. They like put one foot in front of the other and carried on kind of iterating and building that way, right? So yeah, that's the kind of prerequisite to the problems. But I mean, yeah, God, I see problems all the time. It's just which ones are valuable. And honestly, trying to find a problem that was worth solving for me was more of a roller coaster than running the business. Like that was because it was such an emotional time, because I think the best way to find problems is to break them down to first principles. And so you're kind of looking at the sort of the constituent parts of the problem and then building them up into a kind of solution which you could potentially you know, create. And so when you're doing that, it takes enormous mental effort to really boil it down to the root, right? And it would take almost like weeks and research. You know, for the EdTech thing, I was literally sitting in classrooms with schools. I was talking to teachers, as, you know, understanding, you know, the entire market and the kind of, you know, the public sector procurement system and you know, what are the parameters of that. And it took forever. And so once I eventually understood the problem and then I started building up the solution, you know, it'd be an emotional roller coaster, because I'd sort of, I'd have spent there was that sunk cost of like, you spent all this time on it. You almost want it to be successful. So there's almost draw to try and find a solution of any kind. But really, you just have to stay grounded and be like, no, I need to stay objective about this. And so when you actually find, when some person you're interviewing unsolicited says, oh, they find this could be a valuable problem, it's not you that's instigated that kind of biased question, then you get very excited. And so you get very excited to the degree that you think you're onto something. And so I'd run into the living room and tell my wife, I found I've got the business, and sooner or later, for most of those, I found that they didn't check, one of the check boxes wasn't ticked. So, for instance, the hyper competitive or one of the, because I wouldn't know about the solution until the end, right? I wouldn't, because you're building from first principles. And so you spent all this time and then you don't, only at the end you discover if there's like a big, competitor or something like that. And the system worked because by the time I got to that, I had 3 or 4 businesses, I think. And by the time I got to that stage, there was something like one of them had a startup that's raised like $10 million on basically I think they've been around for like 2 months. It's basically off a pitch deck, it's like you're walking into competition straight away. So anyway, yes, lots of prerequisites there. But I mean, one thing I can say for sure, like I'm moving house right now. So one problem that I personally would love someone to solve is conveyancing. So the legals around moving. I've not met a single person that says that is a good experience for them and that the lawyers have been competent. Okay. There's always been, they've always had to like push the rock up the hill. It's always been an absolute, journey and an absolute mission to complete. And my experience is no different. So please, if anyone's listening, it's a hard problem to solve. Lots of moving parts, and I wouldn't envy you in coming up with a solution, but it would be amazing.
Now that's a very similar process to what you did with Claimer in terms of building that idea and building up the product, right? Absolutely, yeah. What else?
I mean, ones that could be valuable. I mean, actually, the kind of the thing I'd encountered before with setting up and handling the legals of a business anywhere in Europe would be very valuable, because you go to any. I mean, UK is surprisingly easy to set up a business. But just the simple thing of setting up a business, there's loads of stuff you have to do after that. But just that first bit, you can do in like 10 minutes. Go to like Portugal or Spain, and my God, like just thinking of a company name takes about a week, because there's so many that you're not allowed to have. And I had to end up like, when I set up a company in Portugal, I think I had to call it like my initials with a number at the end, because it was it was so hard to find, and it was AJCPM 53 or something, because it was like finding a username on like on I don't know some multi-billion user website or something. It was very, very difficult, and that's just a name. God, it was like everything else was also, I needed to hire like a team of people to do it. So I mean, I think there's, like I said, there's a lot of problems, but I think it's to make them into like commercial businesses that have venture scale capacity. I think is extremely difficult, but obviously can be done. But yeah, in terms of just general problems that could be valuable for a business, even if it's a small business, I think there's an enormous number of those. And anyone that sort of looks around, you have to be in that mode of thinking, right? Just looking around and searching for problems, thinking about problems, actually consciously noticing problems and saying, this is a problem, this needs solving. Precisely, yeah. And then understanding that there's enough people there that would actually be willing to just pay for it, I guess, is the key, right?
Yeah. Love it. Well, you laid out the whole process of how to actually think about ideas and how to search for ideas. So really cool. I'm sure people are going to find that useful and interesting.
I hope so.
Very cool. So Adam, thank you so much for coming on. Love the conversation. Good luck with Claimer, and we'll stay in touch.
Thanks very much. It was, thanks for inviting me. Really, really fun. And hopefully we'll do this again soon.
And good luck with the move. I hope that all the aspects go.
Hopefully they're done. Smoothly. We'll see. Well, you never know. Until the fat lady sings, it's not done. So, thanks a lot.